up, guys? Welcome to episode 5 of our Form Check Week. We got 2 more of these coming at you, a full 7 days. If you guys are interested in submitting to be featured on the Big Bad TV, go ahead and submit those videos to calgarybarbell2@gmail.com. If you guys are interested in this brand spanking new swanky merch and apparel that we have for sale, go ahead and head over to calgarybarbell.com. We also just brought on Connor Lutz as a new online coach. We also have a brand new paid form check service for anybody who's looking for a more in-depth critique of their lifts, including cues, potential weak muscle groups, accessory and supplemental exercises, as well as being able to skip the line for Form Check Fridays. So, without further ado, we're gonna get right down to this episode. Our first submission comes from Urkel. Now, Urkel is doing some sumo deadlifts. It looks like he has maybe some limited equipment here. He's got a lot of plates piled on there. They're on a plate to try to make up for the lack of diameter. But the biggest thing, Urkel, is that you're getting very far out on your toes. Excuse me. So when you initiate the lift, you're drifting out onto your toes. The bar's drifting further away from your shins than we'd like it, which is causing a lot of other things to fall apart. We're losing some back angle, we're losing some positioning off the floor. But I think the biggest thing is working on keeping that bar really close to your shins and not getting pulled forward onto your toes with it. One thing that I'm seeing as well in the video is that your footwear might be at least partly responsible. It looks like you're wearing some sort of cushy runners. What I'd like you to try and do is maybe deadlift in sock feet, or if you have a thinner shoe with a harder sole, that could go a long ways for you too. Anyways, Urkel, try those tips out. Let me know how they go for you. Our next submission comes from Jake and Alexandria. First off, looking at Alexandria's deadlift here, she's doing a conventional deadlift. She's got very good positioning, but one thing that I would try to do is I'd try to externally rotate at the hip and open those knees up a little bit. That should allow you to achieve that last little bit of extension in the low back to get into a nice, perfectly neutral, strong position. One thing that's failing as we go through the lifts is we're starting to see a little bit of a loss in that lumbo-pelvic area, right through that low back, and that's a really common thing. But what I think you can do specifically is open those knees up a little bit to allow yourself to extend a little bit better and maintain that position as you initiate the lift. We also have Jake, and Jake is also doing some conventional deadlifts. Very similar advice here, Jake, actually. One thing that I would try to do, it looks like from this angle I can tell that you're fairly narrow in your stance and your grip. What I would try to do is move your grip out just a little bit, move your stance out just a tiny bit, and open those knees up, open those hips up. A lot of times, you guys, if you're finding it hard to get extension, one thing you can do is externally rotate the hips a little bit more, a little bit better, and oftentimes you'll be able to find better extension that way. That's why you see a lot of people switch over to sumo deadlifting, because it's easier to get a neutral spine angle because of moving the hips, I don't know if you want to call it out of the way, but you'll end up with a little bit less impingement using that kind of a technique, more open hip angle. Our next video submission comes from Donald. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. He is a relatively new Irish lifter and is looking to get some critique on his lifts. So he sent in his squat, which to me, no problems, looks very good. He sent in his deadlift, which also to me looks very good. I don't have any criticism for it. That was one thing he addressed in his email, was that his deadlift didn't feel like it was very good, and it felt like there were some technical issues that he could iron out. But honestly, man, I think that you're doing everything right. When it comes to the bench, however, it's a bit sink and heave for my preferences, but you're not necessarily breaking any of the rules here other than on this heavy single. On this single, you can hear his spotter give him the press command, and when he gives him the press command, Donald sinks extra and then fires back up. Now, this will get you called in the IPF. I'm not sure if you've competed before. It's one of those things where maybe you'll get away with it, maybe you won't, but you don't want to leave that up to chance. So, if you're going to come down and kind of use that sink, make sure that when you restart the bar, you don't dip and then restart. When it comes down and sinks, that should be the lowest point, and then straight up from there. It can be a little bit harder to reinitiate and to re-accelerate or not re-accelerate, to accelerate the bar out of that position without that little bit of a dip. But that's kind of why that rule's in place. So let's be cautious of that with your bench press, and let's try not to run into that issue in competition. This next video submission comes from Zach Snapchat, and he's doing some deadlifts here. I believe it's 425 for some fives today, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, actually I'm really happy with what you're doing with your upper back, Zach. It looks like you're doing a good job of effectively like lengthening your arms by how you're locking them in and how you're using your lats to hold that position with the shoulder blades. So really good things going on there. With the low back, however, it looks like you need to get into a little bit more extension, or you're gonna start running into more and more of those choppier lockouts. And I can see on the very end of this set, you're starting to get to the point where it stops, and then you have to kind of pull that back through at the top. So very good upper back. Let's work on extending that lower back just a tiny bit more, and I think you'll be golden. And our last video submission for today comes from Zayad. I hope that's your name anyways, because there's no name on it, and that's what your email address says. So Zayad, doing some squats. Now Zayad said he had a lower back injury and he's trying really hard not to re-aggravate it. He said a couple of the cues that he's found has helped take the pressure off of where he was previously injured was to start looking up in his squat, as well as to shrug his shoulders up into the bar. And he wants to know what I think of those cues and if I have any other advice for him. So first and foremost, I think that looking up probably puts you in a little bit of a better extended position, and it seems to really vary in terms of how people brace. I think there's kind of two camps of bracing. There are people that brace really well, that are very predominantly ribs down, and everything's very much compressed like this, and they almost look a little hunched forward or a little bit in flexion throughout the majority of their spine. And then there's people like a lot of the Eastern European squatters. If you look at Dmitry Semenenko, you look at Yuri Belkin, you look at some of those lifters like that, and they're very extended, even through the thoracic spine. They're looking up, and that seems to work super well for them. Just as an aside, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but Semenenko squatted 400 for a double in just knee wraps, and that's insane. He's my body weight. But anyways, that's just a bit of a digression there. So in terms of the looking up, I think that can be a useful thing. In terms of shrugging up into the bar, that sounds like something that could come back around to not be so good in the long run. Generally, what we're trying to do with the shoulder blades is we're trying to create stability, and most of the time with the lower body lifts, what I personally think about is locking the shoulder blades down. So pulling the shoulder blades down like you're trying to put them in your back pockets to get the lats engaged, to get the shoulders in good position so that your entire trunk is nice and tight. So when your legs go to move, they can move the weight through your body without any energy leaks. When you shrug up, what that to me does is gonna close the shoulder joint. It's gonna cause you to tip forward, which we can see on a number of these reps. And it's gonna cause some other issues potentially down the road as the weight gets heavier. So, while I don't think that's necessarily completely wrong, I feel like that's something that might help for a while, but then is probably going to cause more harm than good in the long run. What I would try to do is find a very stable position with your shoulder blades. Think about pulling them back and pulling them down. Maybe your back is extension intolerant. So what that means is that going into extension for you might be something that is a mechanism for pain. So if you find that's the case, then you're going to be one of those ribs down squatters. I want you to think about clamping your ribs down in the front. We still want to keep those shoulder blades pinned back and open, but don't let those shoulder blades make your whole torso arch up like that. I think that's the way you're going to want to go in terms of bracing. In terms of your squat itself, the biggest thing that I'm seeing is that there's a lapse of control and a little bit of weakness in that bottom position. So a couple things I would recommend are going to be tempo squats. And the two that I've had a lot of success with are a 6-0-0 tempo squat. So a 6-second eccentric, no pause, and just a regular or explosive, if you want to call it that, sort of tempo on the way back up. Just stand it back up. Or the other tempo squat that I had a lot of success with is a 3-0-3 tempo squat. So you're 3 seconds down, no pause on the bottom, 3 seconds on the way back up. And in terms of feeling out positions and becoming comfortable with each and every little bit of the range of motion in the squat, I feel like those are very, very good motor learning tools. And as well, the other thing I would recommend is probably a pause squat, where you're forced to create all the tension needed to hold position in the bottom position when you're there, which the purpose would be to create more strength and comfort in that bottom position. Like I said, it looks like there's a little bit of lapse of control and a little bit of lack of strength. So those would be my go-tos there. And that wraps up Form Check for today. Like I said, head over to calgarybarbell.com, check out all the new exciting stuff we got on the go. If you guys are looking to submit, calgarybarbell2@gmail.com, and we are just wrapping up December. By the end of this week, we'll be into January, y'all. Stay tuned. We'll see you guys tomorrow.